Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Vegas Legal Magazine podcast. I'm Mark Fierro. Joining us today, Jeff Haney, Vice President of Fierro Communications, and Tyler Morgan, publisher of Vegas Legal Magazine. Thank you so much for joining us today. One of the biggest problems we've been coming across over the past decade are the injuries suffered by our military men and women overseas, specifically traumatic brain injuries and post-traumatic stress disorder, the fallout from those injuries as our veterans return home. With us today, retired U.S. Air Force Major Tony Jones. Major Jones is a combat veteran from the war in Iraq and a double Purple Heart recipient. He knows all too well about these types of injuries, not only from his own experience, but also from the injuries of his father, Captain Jones, during the Vietnam War. In fact, Major Jones has written a book about it titled Brain Pain, Our Invisible Wounds. Major Jones, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for inviting.
So I want to hear what brings it to a head. I know you had multiple injuries. Tell me about the one that takes you on this path.
It's a whole progression. You kind of never think it's going to happen to you. You know, as a warfighter and a career military man, it was your choice. You make the choice. You know, serve your country, and you prepare and you train your whole career. And when it happens to you, you just hope everything comes back and you fall into place accordingly. My perspective was I grew up with a father who had been blown up in Vietnam. He suffered 4 explosions, TBI, and PTSD. So I knew something about it already, and I was aware that it's always a possibility. In fact, I remember reading one of my dad's Navy Times before I deployed when I got injured, and it was talking about this new invisible wound. And this was in early 2006 and 7, and I was injured later in later 2007. And I read the paper in Navy Times, and it was talking about this invisible wound. And I'm thinking to myself, it's a new thing, they were saying. And I'm going, this is not a new thing. This thing had been occurring all through Vietnam and all through Korea and all through, they just chose not to acknowledge it. Mm-hmm. And now we're, with the media, social media, and communications as it is, we're much more adept at acknowledging and preparing for these things. I remember giving my troops, when I was in country, the first thing I did was read up on TBIs and PTSD for the soldiers that worked for me, and becoming aware of what the symptoms were and what to look for in other soldiers. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, wow, this is like a real invisible wound, because you really don't, there's not a signature unless you got shrapnel. Yeah, I've got shrapnel holes, but you can't see them. You know, I'm lucky that my legs and hands are intact and everything works. But for the most part, you can't see that except for what's going on in your brain. And traumatic brain injury is, it's like how do I call it? It's like operating on a cable, you know, like you don't have the old internet dial-up modems. That's what I feel like sometimes, you know. I feel like my brain is not working appropriately. It's not working fast. It's hard to multitask. And like the cable modem, like the cable internet high speed that I am now, I used to be. I have my old self and my pre-injury self and my post-injury self. So when I went through it, I decided to write the book because I thought I had a unique perspective on it. Having a father that had these injuries and growing up with these injuries and seeing my dad's nightmares and seeing my dad go through his recovery, and then dealing with what I went through. And I figured it was early enough in the war in 2007, or in this long war that we're still fighting, that there's a lot of lessons that I could pay back and pay it forward to the younger soldiers and the future soldiers.
How did it first manifest itself when you said, you know, we got a problem here?
September 11th, 2007, there was a 9/11 memorial in the Al Fahd Palace where we were at, and me and one of my soldiers were walking out. We were finished with the memorial, and then beautiful day, and all of a sudden I hear a jet flying over. In that millisecond, I realized there was no jets flying at 200 feet in the center of Baghdad. And I knew that it was a rocket, and then there was about to be an explosion. And then a 240 millimeter, which is about the size of this right here, hit in the center parking lot, and it was just devastation. And after it was a whole triage, we did a lot of medical stuff in the soldiers, and I ended up with a concussion that day. But when I went to the doctor, that night is the first time. I like to say that earlier that day was my last time that I had clear thoughts. I couldn't sleep. The headaches were just manifesting continuously. The anxiety was up. At the time, we were getting 34 rocket attacks a day. So it was like constant barrage.
That's part of it, isn't it? You habituate to it, so you're not as afraid of it, and,
Yeah.
and so
Yeah.
naturally now you're taking more hits.
Yeah, exactly.
Anybody else would be hiding down the street, and you're habituated to it.
Yeah, you have to be. It's a survival. And I remember because there was several soldiers injured around me that day, and I always carried my medical kit on me, mostly for myself. I didn't want to not have a tourniquet. But as a staff officer, I wasn't out on the other side of the wire. This was actually inside the wire, but I always carried my med kit, and so I pulled it out. This guy had a leg wound, and you're thinking to yourself, it's like everybody else is running the shelter. You should be in the shelter, because when there's one, there's usually more. But you stay on point, like you just said. You have to stay on point. You have to habituate yourself. You have to, keep in the moment and push through. I call it moving through.
So in these times of war, like when you're stationed in a war zone, like Iraq, the first time you get there, at what point, you're trained to deal with war and high stress situations. You have your first experience, and we'll just take the average troop, for instance. Their first experience is, a landmine or a rocket, or it could be their fellow soldier getting shot. At what point does a soldier realize that, okay, things are not necessarily okay, but then you go from freak out to stress situation to this just becomes kind of normal, and you kind of become, unfortunately, like immune to it? Is there sort of like a level of certain quantity of experiences before a soldier sort of just becomes, I don't know, sort of like numbified to it? You know what I mean?
Yeah, that happens rather quickly.
Yeah.
In the first weeks, first time you get your boots on the ground, first time you're there, it's you
Probably a lot of stress, excitement.
Others try to,
It's
I had
a
a guy,
lot.
one of my roommates was, okay, this is going to happen, this is what's going to happen, and you pass it on. You need to, keep your vest here, you need to keep this here, this is where the, medical outside is, and so you get all those, but I like to call it our military, because our military, whether it's Air Force, Navy, Coast Guard, Marines, sailors, they've trained you, and they've trained you to deploy. So you're aware of this stuff, and that's why, when we train like we fight. So you're aware that these things are going to happen. So for the most part, it's classical conditioning. The Pavlovian salivation, where the dogs salivate when the food comes. It's like, you've been trained so much that when it happens, it's kind of like it's training, until somebody gets hurt and it's real, then it becomes real. So you get through the first couple weeks, and then the intensity realizes, okay, just like anything else, you realize, okay, there's the bunkers, these are the things we do, this is what you have to do,
I imagine it hits
the enemies.
everybody regardless of what their position is out there.
It hits everybody. I mean, I was a staff officer in this deployment. As a staff officer, you're most unlikely to get injured, because you're usually, in command of something. And I was in command of the rescue operations over there. So as opposed to the infantry soldier who's put on the front lines every day.
Yeah.
And he's much more likely. But again, that's part of the, you acclimate quickly. And there is a point when people just, what do you do? I've seen that several times. There were several times when I was diving for the ground and people were just walking past me.
Do you find yourself more immune to just regular day-to-day situations that others would find sort of more devastating or emotional? Do you have a hard time having like an emotional response to things?
Yeah.
That, like, do you find yourself sort of like abnormal and emotional
that
and
was
stressful situations?
You have to. That was one of the hardest things when I got back is empathy and love and compassion, because you have to put that by the wayside overseas. when you're in combat. You can't be too empathetic at the moment because you've got to get through this moment. You know, we've got to get through today. You've got to get through right now, and you can think about the empathy later. You know, if you've got a soldier down, you got to deal with that, get him out of here, and you know, keep moving. And when I got back here, there was a long time before I cried. I know I love my parents, but you love your family and friends, but I couldn't feel it.
I have a hard time expressing it.
Yeah, I had a hard time expressing it. I know you could vocalize it, but I didn't feel the empathy. I didn't feel the compassion.
So we understand your inspiration to tell your story, to share it with the world. But when you decided to write the book, what was that actual process like when you sat down and began writing it, especially from a mental or psychological perspective? Did it bring back a lot of vivid memories as you were going along? How did that work for you?
That was the very hard part, because when I first got back, I could barely read again. I remember going to the gym or going at the hospital, and one article in the paper could take me 30, 40 minutes just to read the article. I had to read it over and over and over because my brain would not absorb. I suffered from massive headaches, and I still to this day have headaches. And I've tried numerous things for them. I'm on the Botox regimen right now, where every 3 months I do Botox injections on my scalp. So the headaches, and they put me on all kind of medication. So it was a process, because I knew it was going to hurt. And literally, the way it works with my type of injury is that the more deep and critical thinking I do, the more headaches that arise. And so I knew that this would be a process. And as a staff officer, I've written numerous papers, I've written other books. And so writing was not the problem. But then again, I could not type. It was the weirdest thing. There was a connection. I had lost the ability to type fast like I had been prior. And so I got dragon speech. And because I was determined. Once I make a commitment to do something, it's going to happen. This could have been easily a 3 to 6 month project prior to my injuries, but it turned out to be a 3-year project because I just could not deal with the things that it brought up, the memories, the flashbacks, the dreams. But I knew that there was a bigger purpose, because my advocacy now is helping others with TBI, whether it's sports injuries, whether it's accidents, or whether it's military veterans.
You bring up sports injuries. We now know that there are people, high school football, college football, that suffer almost precisely the same type of injuries, accumulation of tau. Does it help to know that this is a physical thing, that it's not you, that this is how the human body responds to massive blows that were never meant to be in range of? Does that help? Yes.
The simple answer is yes. Part of my my search was to understand the traumatic brain injury, and in that search I wanted to know more about what was going on in my head. And a quick story. Right after I got my second explosion, and that was the closest. That was like 15 feet from me in open area. So there was nothing between me and the bomb that went off. My eye was swollen up, my eardrums had blown, and the eye doctor, he took, the ophthalmologist take a picture of your eye, and all the capillaries had burst in the back of my eye, and that just lit a light, put a light in my brain. A light went off. Wow, if those capillaries burst, what about the neurons in my head? What about the synapses? What about all those little connections? What about the various areas in my brain that are microscopic, that are carrying these signals? How many of those had burst? How many of those had popped or loosened? I don't know. But there's a physical, and with my situation, there was multiple concussions, multiple explosions. I had 4, 2 that were very close, and 2 others that were within 50 feet. So understanding that there was a similarity to sports injuries and other injuries, and the fact that also connects to mental health issues, depression, anxiety, OCD, other things that when your brain takes a turn, when their synapses aren't they're misfiring, so to speak, that other things occur. So I could link TBI with mental health, and that made me feel a little bit better about my anxiety, because I was like, as a soldier, you want to think you're, I don't want to say just badass, but my dad was badass. I'd like to say that,
Sounds
I
pretty
stood tall.
badass to me.
I stood tall. That's what I like to say. But you don't want to think of yourself as weak. And I was one of those guys. Prior to my injuries, I was one of those guys that did not believe in PTSD. I did not believe in brain injuries. The headaches, the only headaches I'd had was from a hangover.
Yeah,
I'd never had a migraine. I'd never had, the hangovers waking up. Oh yeah, I'd had those. And I thought if you had a mental health disease, you were just kind of like complaining, a whiner or something like that. I now know different.
Yeah, a whole bunch
I
of
admit
people
it.
found out the hard way different. Brain pain, invisible wounds from Tony Jones, Major, retired U.S. Air Force. So remember this. This isn't just from some guy who wrote something. This comes from a lot of pain and injury suffered on our behalf. Okay, he didn't fall down the stairs or something. He's a veteran, and every page of this comes from very real life experience. So you get back home. Now, from an outsider's perspective, not having lived through what you did, my reaction would be, whew, we made it. We're okay. Everything is great. Now let's go back to riding bikes and having a good. What happened?
You spend a lot of time in hospitals. I had a balance issue. I had a reading issue and I had a balance issue. So, and I knew that PTSD was on the horizon. Had nightmares, and then you think you've turned into a weaker individual for whatever. So based on my father having gone through this and his nightmares and seeing what he did and how angry he got and how irritable he got, and knowing that he had a nickname for him, he called himself Defective. And I called myself, I was dealing with mine. I called myself, or my problem, Chaos. So Chaos, I wasn't going to let Chaos win. Chaos was my nemesis now, because he's that little guy on the shoulder, that's fighting this guy on this shoulder. This guy's the one that said, okay, you do right, do good, do things. He's like saying, screw you, let's go do that. Let's go drinking. Let's go to the clubs, Self-medication. I know that was a possibility. Drugs were a possibility. They gave me some serious drugs, which I did not stay on very long, because as a military officer, I want to be in control. I like
What's
to
the
be
kind
in
of
control.
drugs that they would have wanted you to take?
Oh yeah, Percocets were the first ones, and oxycodones were the first one. Were the ones for the headaches, because the headaches were very bad. That is a fact. The headaches were tremendously. I mean, I had nicknames for each of the several headaches, but they were so debilitating. It was hard to focus, hard to see, hard to think. So you go to the doctor, but my goal was, having learned from my father, was to nip this in the bud. I had made the decision to do what I need to do, to go to the doctors, to see everybody, to get as much advice on this, learn as much as I can about this, so I didn't end up like many, many Vietnam War veterans. Having seen, as a Marine brat, my dad was a Marine, so I'm a brat. Having seen that growing up, I wasn't going to let that happen.
And we know so much more. They were flying completely blind.
They
Because
were.
the Korean War guys just clammed up
Just
completely.
clammed up.
You couldn't even get them to admit they were ever in Korea or
That's
knew what
true.
Korea was.
And my dad was a classic on that. My dad was like, very rarely, he's a literal war hero. The siege of Khe Sanh is a noted battle. And he had survived that. And finally, when he's blown up in March, they medevaced him out. But he says it clearly. He said, I put that shit in a box. Put that box, put it in the closet, don't go there anymore, because he had a family. He had to take care of his family. He had to go. He had to move forward. So it was my goal to nip this in the bud. And I remember that summer, the VA, I took the first 6 weeks of PTSD awareness class. I tried to learn as much about it and talk to other veterans. I went to my doctors, my psychologist regularly. That's another thing. I didn't, never believed in therapy. To me, therapy is talking to your friends, talking to your buddies when you go out.
That's
talking
what
to your
beer's
friends.
for,
Yeah,
right?
peers. That's what peers are for, Who needs a therapist? And I was like, but you learn. and you never stop learning. And so going to therapy I found was good. I remember one in Germany when they were medevacing me out, the therapist asked me, so tell me about your childhood. I exploded. I said, I got blown up 3 times, or 2 times. I've been blown up multiple times. I said, what's my childhood got to do with this? And then about a year later, I'm realizing that, my dad has been through this. I went through this before. I've got some other issues here that you don't think about. You just kind of put away to the side.
When you were growing up, did you always want to follow in your father's footsteps and serve your country in this way? Was that always a foregone conclusion in your mind, something you wanted to do? Or?
No, it wasn't. I just know I wasn't going to the Marine Corps because I'd already served in the Marine Corps for 18 years. I knew I was going to go to college. That was kind of my thing, get out of high school, go to college. I went to a community college in Northern Virginia, and then I went to George Mason after that. And I wanted to be in the federal law enforcement. So I remember the guy from NCIS, they interviewed for them, and he said, hey, your scores are good, your grades are good, you look good, but all these Vietnam veterans are coming back with combat experience. And he said, you should try the military. So the realization was that there was a lot of people coming back from Vietnam that had more experience in education than I did at that time. This was like 1979. And so I was like, join the Air Force. And I was like, yeah. Well, the Air Force was, you could fly and you could travel the world. So that was not a foregone conclusion, but, I knew that it was a good life, and it'd get me started in the career path that I hope to follow.
So initially, the VA tries to load you up with some drugs. You find your path on how to deal and not take those, or take some of them, or minimize what they want to give you. Where do you end up? Where do you start to find your balance? Where you say, you know what, I've got the tools. When do things start being okay for Tony?
First couple of years were dark. I must admit that. I fell back into. I have a security company here in town. We do executive protection. I've had that for years, and that was my plan. I was a reservist, so my plan was to come back and take my security company to the next level. I got injured, so that didn't happen. I still have the security company. We still do executive protection. And when I came back, I worked with a company here in town that does training for private security details, PSDs, much like Blackwater. They're called CRI training. I became the training instructor for them. I'd already been instructor with them before, and I became the director of training for them. And that was, unbeknownst to me at the time, it was a good thing, because I needed and wanted to keep busy.
Yeah.
Because if you're not busy, the noise and pain they overtake you, so to speak. And it was my own way of immersion therapy, where you immerse yourself in a similar activity to condition yourself to not worry about it too much. Because we trained with hand-to-hand combat, we trained with vehicles, driving, formations, much like security details for the president DSS does. So it was my own way of, and I'm giving back. I'm giving back to those people. So that kept me busy. And one of my things that I've learned through this whole, that you have to keep busy, you have to keep engaged in something. You have to keep a mission and purpose involved. If you don't have a mission and you don't have a purpose, then you're lost. And you can easily succumb to those vices like drugs and alcohol. And you were asking me about the VA. VA's they don't know. At the time, they were still learning how to handle these things. It's easy for them to hand out pills. Now they've taken a lot of the pills that they were handing out and they're taking them back. They're not giving them out anymore. Because there's an easy transfer from when you stop a prescription and the VA is giving you this, and then they stop it, and then, he goes to the street and gets that.
Yeah.
You can go from oxycodone to heroin like that. And being older, that wasn't going to happen to me. I had to find my own path. I had to keep busy. I had to keep engaged.
So let me ask you this. Young vet, life ahead of him, sitting here, he knows something is wrong, suspects there may be big problems on the horizon. What would you tell him?
You have to want to get better. It's easy to have them medically retire you. It's easy to have that paycheck, and the VA gives you some pills, and it's easy to do that. But if you don't want to get better, you're not going to get better. I call it doing the work. You have to do the work. You have to want to do the work. And having looked back at my family and my dad was engaged with life when he got back. He worked to get back on duty. He challenged himself at work and at home, and he was purposeful because he was taking care of his family. So if I had a short blurb, I would say you have to want to get better. You have to do the work. You have to keep engaged to take care of your body. You have to be challenged to take care of your mind, and you have to be purposeful to take care of your soul. And that gives you a mission. And it gets back to what we were as soldiers and airmen. We have to have that mission. We want to complete the mission. We want to be purposeful.
Don't let them win.
Don't let them win. Exactly. That's a good way. You have to see your path, and somewhere in there, you can find something. I was talking about mountain biking. I never wanted to mountain bike. It didn't attract me. I've always been an athlete, Jim. I pole vaulted in high school and college, but mountain biking had nothing. I had no interest in it. And then I went on a Wounded Warrior project where they take out wounded warriors, they check them out, and we went to Lake Tahoe, and we went mountain biking. And I was like, outdoors, this is pretty good. I like hunting and camping, but outdoors, exercise, it was a whole new thing. I'm having part of what a brain injury does. Our brain is a great predictor, I call it. We spend our whole life predicting the possibilities, whether it's throwing a baseball or how I'm going to make this food today, building the recipe. This is what our brain does. It predicts our best path to survival. And as we go forward, anything that challenges your brain and exercises that to make that prediction better in your favor, so to speak, is good. And when I was mountain biking, it was like, okay, I got to go up, down. You're constantly focused. And if you're focused on this and going here and there, going, brakes, turning left, it was just another way. And I was outdoors. And then I became a mountain biker. If you look at my truck outside, it's got the mountain bike on the back right now. If there's a good day, I'm going mountain biking because it gets me out of my head. It takes me away from the pain in my head and the anxieties that I may be feeling.
And the second you're not thinking about mountain biking, you've got a broken clavicle. So you stay in mountain biking mode, right?
That's true.
You focus in that second, in that split second, or you're going to pay.
Exactly.
So tell us, again, going back to that young man who's, concussive forces and put up with it and realizes he's got an issue. Tell us where exercise is on that continuum of making it back successfully.
Exercise is huge. It's not only been shown and proven scientifically to assist in the brain health, because you're keeping your metabolic system up, you're keeping your heart rate up, you're keeping the pathways, the veins and arteries, you're keeping blood circulating there, you're getting all that through your part. And that part of that is in your brain as well. And if you're exercising, you're doing repetitive, whether it's mountain biking, whether it's at the gym, whether it's on a Peloton, you're in the zone. Whether it's weightlifting, you're in the zone. You're doing something. You're focusing on that, and it's huge in regards of both PTSD and TBIs. There's no doubt. I feel that.
Jeff and Tyler's been there every step of the way with the magazine. We have somebody, Jeff Cranack, and he found a way, and it was through cannabis, and it fixed him to a large extent. Night terrors were gone. He got off all of the drugs except for some very, very minor stuff, and ended up, it changed his life because of draconian laws surrounding cannabis. But you're around veterans. You're a veteran yourself. You've suffered through this, and you've walked the walk. What have you heard from fellow veterans regarding cannabis and whether or not it helps them find their way back home?
I've talked about this in my book. I actually talk about this in the book, and I feel cannabis is the future that we should be exploiting it now. The VA should be exploiting this now. instead of the numerous pills we got. I mentor other younger wounded warriors, and I've had several of them come up to me and talk to me. It's like, I take a couple of hits at nighttime, and it just eases my anxiety, and I'm able to sleep better. And sleep is paramount.
That's like the number one thing,
yeah,
right?
sleep is and I talk
That's
about
the
that.
healing.
That's the healing part. Sleep is paramount. When I was having nightmares years before, if you can't sleep, you can't repair, and then you wake up, and it's like getting worse. Your headaches, so sleep is paramount, and anxiety is paramount. And if you can get over any anxiety and relax and smile, that's part of the happiness and purposefulness. CBD has already been proven to help with seizures in the brain. The Israelis, and I detail it in the book, the Israelis have done several studies that prove that it helps with TBIs, and other studies with anxiety and PTSD. The Israelis actually they medically prescribe it to their warriors. Russia has a patent. We have the patent on it in the United States. The United States government has a patent on it, and Russia has been using it for years. China uses it. There's lots of other studies out there, scientific studies, that I talk about that have shown and proven the efficacy of marijuana as a better way forward for TBI and PTSD than some of the opioids that we've been giving our soldiers.
Talk about the 22 veterans a day are killing themselves in America, more than the height of the war. 22 a day are killing themselves. And I say, as far as and I'm not talking about driving impaired or anything like that, but as far as I'm concerned, get the hell out of the way and let them do what they want to do. They own their own fate.
You just don't even come across veterans anymore that don't have some form of PTSD.
It's improvised roadside explosive devices. It's mortar rounds. That you guys so hard-assed that you just walk away from them, not realizing what it's doing to the organic mind. And it's not emotion. It's none of that. It's not will. It's not human will. It's your brain, and it can only take so many hits.
And what we've discounted here and don't see, and I didn't see it either until one of my colleagues in a private company, as a former military officer, combat veteran, they did a study on not only the actual combat explosions that you're aware of, but the other concussions you had during your life, and the micro concussions you had during training, during throwing in simulated grenades, throwing in knocking off artillery rounds. How many micro concussions have these guys had during training, as well? Vehicle accidents, and then you get another explosion. I look back at my life and I was like, wow, I studied karate all those years. I've had several concussions. I've had a couple loss of consciousness a couple times before this. So it's just a compounding thing going on. So you have to be aware not only of the actual combat incidents, but the training incidents in the military as well.
I know in the book you do address the scourge of veteran suicides, one of the most tragic issues in our society at this time. Certainly no easy answers to that. But in your mind, what steps can be taken to help battle that and hopefully solve that problem?
I do. One of my chapters is 22 a day because we're losing that battle, and it comes down to a soldier's self-worth at the time when he goes through this stuff. Finances are a big part of this. His ability to return home, deal with others. His ability to ask for help is huge. And that's where I get back to do the work. He has to want, and if he can ask for help, he can get help. But the stigma, and his stigma is much better than it was during Vietnam. In Vietnam, they didn't ask for help. It was like, we don't talk about that. My dad remembers specifically, we didn't talk about that. It was weakness. But it's getting better when people, soldiers, airmen, now can ask for help. Talking to your friends, therapy. Overcoming these stigmas is a huge part of this. And suicide is very real. It's knocked on my door. It's knocked on my door, and through the grace of God, I was able to repel it. But when it comes, you lose focus. And with TBI and PTSD, one of your weaknesses is becoming easily overwhelmed. you lose focus. Whether it's your wife leaving you, or whether it's that you can't pay the bills, you don't see your way out, and it becomes a tunnel vision. It becomes tunnel vision, and it's somewhere in here that you have to be able to ask for help. And we're getting so much better at offering the help, but it's getting that connection, final connection to the help. I remember in my worst critical moment, I reached out and I made a couple calls, and just through happenstance, nobody answered. It was like, I remember thinking, it's like, okay, I know it's Friday night and I know it's late. Somebody answer.
Somebody pick up the phone,
You know?
damn it.
But, and that's part of it, but these things, if we can fit, one of my big points is about being able to interrupt the patterns, whether negative or positive, mostly negative, interrupt the patterns going on in the brain at that time. My dad did it, or my mom did it to my dad in Vietnam. That's how I remember. Dad would get angry or something. He'd have a nightmare. Mom would be like, okay, the kids are going to school tomorrow. You know, we got to get them to the bus, and we have to go shopping for this. She would try to change the subject all the time. You know, she was just a master at it because she knew the explosion was on the way. You know, I ended up changing the subject and calling it pattern interrupt. You got to be able to interrupt that negative pattern that's overcoming the person at the time. And by offering critical services, and whether it's phone or in person, that helps. It gives them a way to think about that. Because the person's got to be able to, in their mind, they've got to be able to, it's like, do I take the pill or do I not take the pill? It's like you've got to be able to move through to the positive aspect of it. And that's the hard one, because the tunnel vision can come on quickly and it could end up with disastrous results.
And if nobody answers at first, like happened to you, keep trying. Right?
Keep trying.
So it's only temporary.
Keep
You'll
trying.
get through.
Exactly. And I got through that night. And but it's keep trying and realize when you make that call, you're reaching out. That's part of the things. That's the good sign, is you're reaching out. You're trying to connect. You're realizing that the tunnel vision is getting tight, and you know that I need help, and that's where we're there. And I've been on the other end of that call. I've been there, and I mentor Wounded Warriors now, and I've been there where, you know, I can't do this anymore. I can't. Well, okay, come on. Where you at? Okay, I'll be right down. Don't see you there. Okay, we're gonna have some coffee. We're gonna talk. You know. Because it usually just takes that. It usually just takes that. I became a master at listening, you know, and it can be very helpful for both parties. One, the persons need to talk. They need to get it off their chest. The other one, as a listener, you constantly grow. You realize the depth of other people's problems. Yeah.
Let me ask you, having seen the intergenerational change, isn't it true that now the first step is just showing up? You don't have to know anybody or listen to anybody or anything. Just being with other people, hearing, and you go, that's me. That's me. Our group that Forgotten Not Gone, and you mentioned Wounded Warrior, simply immersing you. So you don't have to initially commit yourself to this big pathway. Just get your ass there, right? Just take that first step. And a lot of it, you're these new people who are going to become your friends, who are going to help push you for the next few days, won't they?
That's true. This is part of the benefits of the Wounded Warrior program, and there are many, many programs out there for veterans that people like myself and other veterans have started, and it's just part of doing the work. My quick story was, I was in a dark place in 2008, 2009, and my therapist suggested horse therapy. And I'm like, man, last time I was on a horse was in college. Damn thing knocked me off on the ground right in front of my girlfriend, couldn't impress her, you know. I said, I don't know about this. I was not, you know, but remember my nip in the bud thing? You know, I said, you got to do the work, you know. And I went to a local organization here called Spirit Therapies. And they do a program called Horses Healing Heroes. And I was like, I don't know about this, you know. So I started, went for a couple weeks, and the therapist, we go through the procedure. And then about 6 weeks into it, I realized, look back at what I was doing. I said, first off, I'm giving this guy a massage. I'm rubbing down this horse, I'm cleaning his hoof, giving him a manicure, pedicure. And then I realized I never left without a smile. I didn't think about my headaches. Yeah, I tapped on my head because that's part of what I do. And my headaches were there, but I always had a smile when I left. The horses are unconditionally loved. And that's why I believe so much in equine therapy, and I believe in dog, service dogs, because, plus you talk to them. It's like, they don't care. They're just listening. They love you because you're present with them.
Yep.
You're present with them, and they see that you're, have some anxiety going on. They can feel you. They can read your body language.
Absolutely.
So whether it's this program, whether it's a Wounded Warrior program, whether it's a fishing program, whether it's a surfing program, you don't know. As a veteran, as a young veteran, take advantage of these opportunities and go on some of these programs, and you may find, like I did, something that works for you. My whole slogan of doing the work came out of horse therapy, because every Friday morning I had to drive all the way across town, because I live on the south side of town, and that's on the north side of town. It was a 45-minute drive in traffic. I got up when I didn't want to go because I had a headache or I had an excuse, but I went, and I always had a smile, So it became part of my lifestyle, and it was like, okay, the benefits here is I'm healing myself. It may take a long time, but hey, I'm still here.
There you go. First
so
things
take
first.
advantage of these opportunities, whether it's fly fishing or sporting. There's many things out there. Something you might find, and that goes back to my keep engaged. If you're keeping busy, if you're keeping engaged with your mind, you get challenged with your mind and exercise your brain, which heals that, which gives you purpose also, because you've got a mission again.
The book, Brain Pain. Major Tony, we're going to have you back on again, man. A lot of answers in here. If you got a loved one, okay, if you got a loved one that's having some problems, if you're in a position where you're having some problems, this guy knows a lot. 2 generations of knowing a whole bunch about a very, very troubling aspect.
My author's website is majoranthonyjones.com.
Where else can we get it? Is that the only where?
No, it's on Amazon.
On Amazon, so that's
there's some
quick
free
access.
chapters on my website, Major Anthony Jones, just like it sounds. And there's a whole, everything we're talking about today.
Love it, brother. We're going to have you back on again.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. With that, we call it a day. Vegas Legal Magazine podcast. I want to sincerely thank Major Tony Jones, author of Brain Pain, for his service to our country, and helping a lot of people who have helped this country pull their lives together. Tyler Morgan, publisher of Vegas Legal Magazine. Jeff Haney, Vice President of Fiero Communications. Remember to like and share the Vegas Legal Magazine podcast, especially this one, on Facebook. And also catch us on YouTube, iTunes, or my personal favorite, Stitcher. And for all of you out there with a story ID, or an axe to grind, get a hold of Vegas Legal Magazine, the leading magazine in the Southern Nevada legal market. You can call Tyler at
702-222-3476.
reach out, tell us, tell your friends. Have a good one. We're out of here.